When Loki found himself transported to the TVA's dumping ground at the end of time, he came face to face with, well, himself. There was a classic Loki from the comics, a boastful Loki, an alligator Loki, and a Kid Loki. In the 5th episode, even more Lokis were introduced, but only one was a kid, and he came straight out of the books. His comic book origin. Now in the comics, Loki worked his magic to manipulate Norman Osborn into leading Hammer and the Dark Avengers to attack Asgard. His goal was to have it return to its proper place in the 9 realms, but things didn't go according to plan. Unfortunately, Loki underestimated Osborn's attack dog, Sentry, and his Void Persona's power, which is off the scale levels of destructive. When Osborn unleashed the full power of the Void, Asgard was destroyed. Seeing that his plan went away off the rails, Loki used the Norn stones to help repel the Void and was killed in the process. He died in front of Thor, and for real this time, saying, "I'm sorry, brother," before meeting his end. That was it. Loki was finally dead in the comics. Well, maybe not. Death is rarely more than a mere inconvenience for a comic book character, and Loki is no exception. Before the siege of Asgard took place, Loki managed to manipulate Hela into removing his name from the Book of Hel. This made it possible for him to be reborn upon death, and that's precisely what happened. In Thor 617, Loki was reborn as a young version of himself. He appeared in Paris, France, where he was going by the name Serrure, which means lock in French. He had no memories of his previous life as an adult. When Thor found him and chased him down, the Thunder God told him of his true nature, and Loki thought he was dealing with a madman. Loki began to believe him with a bit of time, seeing as his dreams seemed to align with the things Thor told him. Loki felt his nightmares might be lingering memories of his actions as an adult, and Thor offered to help his brother. He returned him to Asgard and restored some of his identity. Now still, most of his powers and any recollection of his past were gone. The other Asgardians didn't trust him. Loki suffered Asgardian distrust and hatred from everyone in Asgard. Still, he wanted to help. Thor was his brother, and he would help him in any way that he could. He saved his brother and Asgard when Galactus invaded the realm. But his actions during this event only enraged Thor, who saw the old Loki's trickery in his younger form. He threatened to kill him, causing the child to burst out into tears. Thor apologized, but the damage was done. Soon after, Loki deciphered a riddle, taking him to a chamber where an echo of his former self explained his plan. He had to die so he could return, and the elder Loki told Kid Loki how he would aid him in returning to his former glory. Kid Loki wanted nothing to do with his former self, so he transformed the echo into a magpie, naming it Ikkol, and making it his minion. Kid Loki's fate. This lasted for a while, but during the war against the Serpent, Kid Loki was put into a terrible position. Due to the machinations of his former self, he was given no option but to allow Ikkol to become Loki once more, resulting in Kid Loki's existence coming to an end. He literally ceased to be, leaving only Loki, still in kid form, who became horrified at what he'd done to his former self, screaming, "I am the crime that will not be forgiven." Throughout his time in the Marvel Universe, Kid Loki appeared in several ongoing events. Still, after he ceased existing, leaving room for Ikkol, he was most closely associated with the Young Avengers. During the series' 2013 relaunch, Kid Loki joined up with the team of superheroes, but they didn't trust him right away. Ultimately, he proved his worth, even without his powers being near where they were when he was an adult. He remained an incredibly powerful player. During his time with the team, he tricked Wiccan into lending him his powers for 10 minutes. Loki then abandoned the team but returned, leaving Wiccan to magically age Loki from his Kid Loki body into that of a teenager. Loki's powers returned to full strength when he did this, but he was racked with guilt over his actions and deceiving the team, who ultimately forgave him. Now the difference between Loki and Kid Loki is, well, Kid Loki was kind of like Loki 2.0, but he had a different personality. Kind of. He was genuinely reborn as a new person with no memories of his past life, but he retained many of his adult self's bad traits. Lying came easily to Kid Loki, as did tricking and manipulating people to get what he wanted. The difference between the two revolved around the morality of each version. Adult Loki's intentions were always centered around an evil intent. In contrast, Kid Loki's goals were centered around nothing but good intentions. He had no sense of being evil like his former self. Still, because he was Loki to everyone else around him, his actions were almost always seen as coming from a dark place. Kid Loki was forced to spend a great deal of time trying to convince the people around him that he wasn't the man they remembered. This drive and motivation manifested into a fear of growing up. So, Kid Loki became determined not to turn into a villain as he was supposedly destined to become, which became his driving focus. His powers were much weaker in his new form, but this didn't keep him from doing whatever he believed necessary to support Thor and prove his worth. He also had a great deal of love for Thor, since he was the only Asgardian who protected and loved him. Now you might be wondering what the difference is from the comic book character version and the one from Loki. The Kid Loki from the Disney Plus series has the right look compared to his comic book counterpart. Still, he appears to be different in one critical aspect. Kid Loki claimed he was pruned by the TVA for committing the unforgivable crime of successfully killing Thor. That was something that no other Loki managed to do, so he was revered by variant companions. And it was a crime that couldn't possibly have made him more different from the original comic book version of Kid Loki. As we talked about earlier, Kid Loki idolized Thor in the comics, so much so that he often began his days wondering how he could prove to his brother that he wasn't a horrible, evil little villain. And in the end, Kid Loki proved his worth and became one of the most noble Asgardians during his years alive. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe here if you're new. I will catch you in the next video on fantasy theory. Until then, remember, with great power comes great responsibility.